I stared at the eviction notice trembling in my hands, my world crumbling around me. After 40 years of marriage, 4 decades of supporting my husband's dreams, I was being thrown out of my own home with nothing but a suitcase and memories. At 65, I was starting over, homeless, nearly penniless, and utterly betrayed by the man I'd built a life with. When you've given your soul to someone who tosses it away like garbage, I whispered to myself, you have 2 choices: break, down, or rise up. That day, standing on the curb of what used to be my home, I chose to rise. What I didn't know then was that a seed I'd planted years before was about to bloom, changing everything about my future and teaching my ex-husband the true cost of underestimating me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I met Robert Wilson when I was 22 and brimming with ambition. I'd just finished my business degree at Boston University, one of only 7 women in my graduating class. My professors had praised my marketing insights, and I had 3 job offers from respectable firms lined up. The world seemed wide open. Then I met Bob at a friend's dinner party. He was 24, charming, with intelligent eyes and grand dreams of building his own consulting firm. We connected instantly over a shared vision of what business could be ethical, impactful, revolutionary. When he spoke about his ideas, his eyes lit up with such conviction that I couldn't help but believe in him too. You're different from other women, he told me on our 3rd date, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You understand business like a man, but you have this intuition, this way of seeing people that I could really use. 6 months. Later, we were married in a small ceremony at my parents' church in Oak Ridge. 2 weeks after that, Bob received seed funding for his consulting startup. This is it, Kathy, he said, popping champagne in our tiny apartment. Wilson Consulting is born, and I want you beside me, building this from the ground up. I called the firms that had offered me positions and regretfully declined. My husband needed me, and together, we were going to build something extraordinary. Or so I thought. For the first 5 years, I worked alongside Bob without a salary. We need to reinvest everything, he explained. Once we're established, we'll put you on the payroll properly. I managed our finances, crafted marketing materials, wined and dined clients' wives, and kept our household running on a shoestring budget. When our daughter Jennifer was born, I added motherhood to my list of unpaid jobs. In year 7, the business was flourishing, but my promised position never materialized. The optics aren't right, Kathy, Bob said when I raised the issue. People will say you only got the job because you're my wife. Besides, we're a family. It's all our money. Anyway, why complicate things with a separate salary? It made sense at the time. We were a team, a unit. What was his was mine. I pushed down my disappointment and focused on being the perfect wife, mother, and unofficial business partner. I hosted dinner parties for clients, edited Bob's presentations, and even ghost wrote articles that were published under his name in leading business journals. When we finally bought our Tudor-style house in Oak Ridge Estates, the crown jewel of suburban Boston, Bob put only his name on the deed. Tax purposes, he assured me. Everything's ours together, but this way we pay less. By our 15th anniversary, Wilson Consulting Group had grown to 50 employees. Bob's reputation as a brilliant strategist was solidified, and our social circle consisted of Boston's business elite. I was known as Bob's wife, the elegant hostess, the supportive partner, the woman who'd given up her career for love. Only Diane Winters, my former professor who'd become a close friend, seemed troubled by the arrangement. "You're too smart to be just someone's wife, Kathy," she said during one of our monthly lunches. "Your insights are still sharper than most of my current students." "I'm not just anything," I protested. I'm integral to Bob's success. We're partners. Diane gave me a long, measured look. Are you, though? What's yours in this partnership? What's actually in your name? The question unsettled me, but I brushed it aside. We were building a legacy for our daughter. That was what mattered. In our 25th year of marriage, Jennifer graduated from Dartmouth and began dating Kevin Cooper, the son of one of Bob's golf buddies. He's going places, Bob approved. Smart match. Around the same time, Bob hired Vanessa Palmer, a MBA fresh from Harvard, as his executive assistant. She was brilliant, beautiful, and 30 years younger than him. I noticed how his eyes followed her around the office during company functions, but I trusted my husband implicitly. We had decades of history. We had a daughter. We had built something together. You need to watch that one, my friend Patty warned after a company Christmas party. Patty had been with the firm since the early days, working her way up to HR director. The way she looks at Bob isn't professional. Don't be ridiculous. I laughed it off. Bob would never. And she's younger than our daughter. When our 35th anniversary approached, Bob became distant. He worked later, traveled more, and barely engaged when he was home. I tried everything. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, even suggesting we finally take that European trip we'd been postponing for decades. I'm just swamped, Kathy, he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. The Mason account is crucial. We'll celebrate properly once it's secured. I believed him. I always believed him. It was Diane who once again tried to shake me from my complacency. Over lunch at her countryside home, she asked point blank, "Have you been handling your own financial planning, Kathy? Do you have accounts? In your name?" "Bob takes care of all that," I said dismissively. "He's the financial genius." Diane set down her fork with unusual firmness. "Listen to me. Every woman needs her own money, even happily married ones, especially happily married ones." "What are you suggesting?" I felt defensive. "I'm suggesting that 40 years in business has taught me that even good men make bad decisions when their egos are involved," she said flatly. "I'm suggesting you protect yourself." I changed the subject, uncomfortable with her implications. But later that week, when Bob was on a business trip to New York, I tried accessing our joint accounts online. The passwords had been changed. When I asked Bob about it after his return, he seemed irritated. "I'm upgrading our security. 2. Many hacks these days. I'll set you up with limited access for household expenses." Limited access to our joint funds after 40 years. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Instead, I recalled Diane's advice and made an appointment with a financial advisor of my own. Using the small inheritance I'd received when my mother passed, the only money that was truly mine, I made a modest investment in a tech startup that one of Diane's former students had founded. The company specialized in sustainable energy solutions, something I'd always been passionate about. "This is high risk," the advisor warned, "but high potential return. Are you sure this is how you want to use your inheritance?" I signed the papers with a strange sense of defiance. "Yes, this is mine, and I believe in it." For our 40th anniversary, Bob didn't come home at all. Instead, I received a text. "Working late. Don't wait up." At 11 p.m., Jennifer called, her voice strange and strained. "Mom, you need to come to the Lakeside Country Club right now. It's important." "What's wrong? Is your father okay?" A long pause. "Just come, Mom." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Please." I drove through the quiet suburban streets, my heart pounding with dread. The country club was mostly empty on a Wednesday night, but I spotted Jennifer's car in the parking lot, alongside Bob's Mercedes. When I entered the darkened restaurant, I saw them immediately. Jennifer, Kevin, and Bob, huddled in a corner booth looking somber. And beside Bob, her hand on his arm, sat Vanessa Palmer. "Kathy," Bob stood awkwardly when he saw me. "We were going to tell you tomorrow." "Properly." "Tell me what?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Dad and Vanessa are getting married," Jennifer blurted out, her eyes not meeting mine. "They wanted me to help. Prepare you." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Married? Bob, what are you talking about? We're married." Bob had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I filed for divorce 6 months ago, Kathy. The papers were delivered to the house." "What papers? I never received any papers." But even as I protested, I remembered the certified mail I'd set aside for Bob to handle, as I always did with official correspondence. "It'll be finalized next week," he continued, his voice taking on that soothing tone he used with difficult clients. "I've been more than generous with the settlement. You'll get the vacation cottage in Vermont and a monthly stipend." "Stipend?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign and insulting. "After 40 years. Mom," Jennifer interrupted, "Dad's being more than fair. The company predates your marriage, and you were never officially employed there. Legally?" "Legally?" I stared at my daughter, this stranger who looked like me but spoke with the cold precision of her father. "I helped build that company from nothing. I raised you while working unpaid. I edited your father's books. I entertained his clients. I made choices," Bob finished firmly. "You chose to be a housewife, Kathy. No one forced you. And now I'm ensuring you'll be taken care of, despite having no legal obligation to do so." "No legal obligation," I echoed, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the trap I'd walked into 40 years ago. All those papers I'd signed without reading, all those accounts in his name for tax purposes, all those years believing we were partners when the legal reality was entirely different. Vanessa spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Mrs. Wilson, I know this is a shock, but Bob has been unhappy for years, and you deserve the chance to find happiness too." I looked at this woman, younger than my daughter, wearing a diamond ring that was undoubtedly worth more than the generous settlement Bob was offering, and felt something crack inside me. "How long?" I asked Bob directly. He at least had the grace to flush. "Kathy, that's not..." "How long?" 3 years, he admitted, but it only became serious recently. 3 years, while I was planning our 35th anniversary, while I was caring for his mother through cancer, while I was still believing in us. I turned to Jennifer, my voice breaking. "And you knew? For how long?" She squirmed uncomfortably. "Dad needed support, Mom, and objectively speaking, the settlement is very fair considering I'm just the mother who sacrificed everything for you both, just the wife who worked for free, just the woman who believed in partnership and family above legal protections." Kevin cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Wilson, emotion shouldn't cloud a straightforward business matter. The law is clear on..." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. 40 years, I said quietly. 40 years I gave you, Robert. Remember that." As I walked out, I heard Jennifer call after me, but I didn't turn back. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of tears. Then, I wiped my eyes, fixed my lipstick in the rearview mirror, and drove home. Except it wasn't home anymore. A week later, the divorce was finalized in a sterile courtroom. I received the Vermont cottage that needed significant repairs, a monthly stipend that barely covered basic expenses, and a clear message. I had been a fool to believe in love over legal protection. The day after the divorce, I received a formal eviction notice. The Tudor house where I'd raised my daughter, hosted hundreds of dinner parties, and built a life was to be sold. Bob and Vanessa were purchasing a penthouse downtown, closer to the company headquarters. "You have 30 days," the notice read dispassionately. I called Jennifer, hoping my daughter might offer shelter while I regrouped, but her response was chilling. "Kevin and I are renovating right now, Mom. There's literally no space. Besides, the Vermont cottage is yours. Why don't you just go there?" When I pointed out that the cottage had no heating system and a collapsing roof, she sighed. "Maybe. This is a sign you need to be more independent. Dad won't respect you if you keep acting helpless." I hung up, a strange calm settling over me. If my own family saw me as nothing but a burden, a relic of the past to be discarded, then perhaps it was time to rebuild on my own terms. I called Patty, who had recently retired from Wilson Consulting. "Can I stay with you while I figure things out?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "But what happened to the house? I thought Bob was letting you stay there until he changed his mind," I said simply. "Or rather, Vanessa changed it for him." Patty's voice hardened. "That manipulative little... Well, never mind. You come stay with me as long as you need. We'll figure this out together." As I packed up 40 years of memories into a few suitcases, deciding what qualified as truly mine, I discovered something remarkable. In a folder marked personal, I found the investment paperwork from 5 years earlier, the tech startup I'd invested my small inheritance in. Out of curiosity, I logged into the investment portal to check its status. The page loaded, and I gasped. My modest $75,000 investment, the only money that had ever been truly mine, had grown to just over $3.2 million. The sustainable energy company had gone public the previous year and was now one of the fastest-growing stocks in the sector. And I owned a significant chunk of early shares. I sat on the floor of what used to be my bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and began to laugh. Then cry. Then laugh again. I had money. My own money. Money that Bob knew nothing about, that wasn't part of the divorce settlement, that belonged solely to me. For the first time in 40 years, I had not just independence, but power. I dried my tears and reached for my phone, but not to call Bob or Jennifer or even Patty. I called Diane. "I need to see you," I said when she answered. "I think it's time I took your advice about managing my own finances." Diane chuckled. "About damn time, Kathy. Come over tomorrow. And bring that investment statement with you. I have a feeling we have some planning to do." As I sealed the last box of my possessions, I glanced around the empty master bedroom. So many nights spent here, planning Bob's career moves, supporting his dreams, believing we were building something together. "Goodbye, Robert," I whispered to the empty room. "You have no idea what you've just lost." I walked out of the Tudor house for the last time, my future suddenly wide open at 65. Behind me lay 40 years of sacrifice and betrayal. Ahead lay possibility, and the sweetest revenge of all, a life well lived on my own terms. Patty's spare bedroom became my sanctuary for the next 3 weeks. Each morning, I'd wake to the unfamiliar ceiling, momentarily confused before reality crashed back. I was divorced, essentially homeless, and starting over at 65. But each morning, I also reminded myself of the $3, $2 million quietly, sitting in my investment account, my secret strength, my unexpected second chance. "You look different today," Patty remarked over coffee on my 4th morning in her home. "There's something in your eyes I haven't seen in years." I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. Clarity, perhaps? It's strange. I've lost everything I thought defined me, but I feel more like myself than I have in decades. Patty nodded slowly. "That's what happens when you stop carrying dead weight. You were bending yourself into impossible shapes to accommodate Bob's ego for so long. You forgot your own contours." That afternoon, I had my first meeting with Diane and the financial team she'd assembled, a fiduciary advisor, an accountant, and a real estate attorney. We gathered around Diane's dining room table, papers spread before us like battle plans. First priority, Diane stated firmly, is securing proper housing. The Vermont cottage is a money pit, and staying with Patty isn't sustainable long-term. The real estate attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Helen, leaned forward. I've reviewed your divorce settlement. The stipend is laughably inadequate, especially considering the current housing market. However, she smiled slightly, we have an ace up our sleeve that Robert doesn't know about. My investment, I confirmed. Exactly, the financial advisor chimed in. $3.2 million gives you options, but we need to be strategic. I recommend liquidating just enough shares to secure housing and establish your independence, while keeping the majority invested for continued growth. I nodded, a plan forming. I don't want anything extravagant, something modest but nice, in my name only. What about starting a business? Asked the accountant, reviewing my resume. You have a business degree and 40 years of practical experience, even if it wasn't officially recognized. The question caught me off guard. A business of my own. I'd spent so long supporting Robert's ambitions that I'd almost forgotten I once had dreams of my own. Let me think about that, I said carefully. For now, let's focus on housing and stabilizing my situation. We settled on liquidating $500,000 of my shares, enough to purchase a small but elegant townhouse in Riverside Gardens, a charming community near the water, far from Oak Ridge Estates and the social circle that had already begun treating me like an unfortunate casualty of progress. The day I signed the papers for my new home, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd experienced before. This was mine, purchased with my money, in my name. No one could take it from me. To new beginnings, Diane toasted that evening, raising a glass of champagne in what would soon be my living room. And to financial independence, added Patty with a wink. I raised my glass, the bubbles catching the late afternoon light. To the unexpected gifts of starting over. We laughed and drank, and for the first time since that devastating night at the country club, I felt something like joy. The feeling was short-lived. The next morning, Jennifer called, her tone unusually conciliatory. Mom, I heard you're moving to Riverside Gardens? That's unexpected. I could hear the poorly disguised surprise in her voice. Riverside Gardens was significantly more upscale than what should have been possible on my generous settlement. Yes, I close on the property next week, I replied neutrally. But how? Those townhouses are at least $500,000. I'm managing my finances carefully, I said, unwilling to reveal my secret just yet. How are you and Kevin? Jennifer hesitated before answering, and I could almost see her recalculating her approach. We're good. Actually, we were wondering if you might come over for dinner this weekend. Dad and Vanessa will be there. It would be nice to have everyone together civilly. The invitation felt like a trap. This weekend won't work for me, I said smoothly. I'm quite busy with the move. Mom, Jennifer's voice took on that slightly condescending tone she'd developed in recent years. Don't you think it's time to move past the bitterness? Dad is concerned about you. We all are. I nearly laughed out loud. Concerned? About what, exactly? Your mental state, the isolation. Dad thinks you might be making rash decisions out of spite. Ah. Now I understood. Robert was perplexed by my housing purchase and wanted to assess how I'd managed it. Whether I'd taken out loans I couldn't afford, or perhaps was receiving financial help he could somehow claim a right to. Please tell your father that my mental state is excellent, and my decisions are entirely rational. Also remind him that as we are divorced, my financial choices are no longer his concern. Mom, Jennifer sounded scandalized. He's just trying to help. No, Jennifer, he's trying to control. There's a significant difference. After hanging up, I sat in Patty's kitchen, trembling slightly. Standing up to my ex-husband, even indirectly, felt foreign and frightening. For 40 years, I'd deferred, accommodated, and yielded. Now I was drawing boundaries, and it was terrifying. Patty found me still sitting there 20 minutes later. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just spoke with Jennifer. Apparently Robert is concerned about my decisions." Patty rolled her eyes. "Of course he is. Men like Robert can't stand it when women they've discarded refuse to crumble. It disrupts their narrative. He wants me to come to dinner with him and Vanessa," I said, still disbelieving. "The absolute audacity." Patty slammed her mug down. "Please tell me you told him to go to hell." "Not in those exact words," I smiled faintly. But the sentiment was clear. "Good. The best revenge is living well, Kathy. Remember that. Living well." The phrase echoed in my mind as I packed the few possessions I'd claimed from my former life. Was that what I was after? Revenge? Or something else entirely? The chance to finally discover who Catherine Wilson might have been if she hadn't sacrificed everything for Robert's dreams? Moving day arrived crisp and clear. As the movers carried my sparse belongings into the townhouse, I wandered through the empty rooms, trailing my fingers along walls that belonged entirely to me. The space was smaller than the Tudor home I'd left behind, but it felt expansive, with possibility. "It's perfect," I whispered to myself, standing in the bay window that overlooked a small garden. "It's mine." That evening, after the movers left, I sat on the floor of my new living room. I hadn't yet purchased furniture, eating takeout Chinese food directly from the container and drinking a glass of good wine. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Dad and I drove by your new place today. It's nice. Still don't understand how you afforded it. Hoping you haven't done something desperate you'll regret." I set the phone down without responding, a slow anger building in my chest. So Robert had actually driven by to inspect my new home, like I was a teenager who needed monitoring, and Jennifer had gone along with it, reporting back like his little spy. My doorbell rang unexpectedly, startling me from my thoughts. I peered through the peephole to see Warren Davis, one of Robert's oldest friends and our former neighbor in Oak Ridge Estates, standing on my porch with a bottle of wine. Reluctantly, I opened the door. "Kathy, surprise housewarming visit," he announced with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "May I come in?" Before I could answer, he stepped past me into the foyer, glancing around with poorly disguised curiosity. "Quaint," he declared, handing me the wine bottle. "Smaller than you're used to, but cozy." "Thank you for the wine, Warren," I said stiffly, "but I'm rather tired from moving all day." He ignored my hint. "Bob mentioned you'd purchased in Riverside Gardens. I must say, we were all quite surprised. These properties aren't cheap." Ah, so Robert had sent his friend to investigate. How predictable. "Life is full of surprises," I replied blandly. "Would you like that wine back for the road? As I mentioned, I'm quite exhausted." Warren's face tightened with annoyance. "Come, now, Kathy. We've known each other 30 years. Surely you can spare a few minutes to catch up. The old neighborhood misses you." Does it? How interesting, considering not a single person from Oak Ridge Estates called to check on me after Robert discarded me for his assistant. Warren had the decency to look uncomfortable. "These situations are always complex. Bob says—" "I don't particularly care what Bob says anymore, Warren. But I am curious. Did he send you here to find out how I afforded this place?" Warren's face flushed. "He's concerned, Kathy. We all are. Women in your position sometimes make financially unsound decisions out of emotion." "Women in my position?" I echoed, my voice dangerously calm. "You mean women whose husbands leave them for younger models after decades of marriage? Women who are expected to disappear quietly into poverty and obscurity? Those women?" "Now, Kathy. Let me save you the trouble of further reconnaissance, Warren. I purchased this home outright, with cash, using my own funds. I am not in debt. I am not making rash decisions. I am simply living my life, which is no longer any of Robert's business, or yours. I opened the front door pointedly. Thank you for the wine. Good night. Red-faced, Warren shuffled past me. You've changed, Kathy, he muttered as he left, and not for the better. I closed the door behind him, leaning against it with my heart pounding. Another boundary established, another test passed. But I knew this was just the beginning. Robert would not stop until he understood where my newfound financial independence came from. The next morning, I awoke to multiple missed calls from Jennifer and an email from Robert's attorney requesting an urgent clarification regarding undisclosed assets in the divorce proceedings. So it had begun, the attempt to claim a portion of my investment, the money that had never been part of our marital assets, because Robert had insisted everything financial be kept in his name only. I forwarded the email to Helen, my real estate attorney, who responded within the hour. This is phishing. They have no evidence, just suspicion. Don't engage directly. By lunchtime, Robert himself called. Against my better judgment, I answered. Catherine, he began, using my full name as he always did when attempting to exert authority. We need to talk. About what, Robert? About whatever financial resources you've recently accessed. If you had assets you didn't disclose during our settlement, that constitutes fraud. I nearly choked on my tea. The sheer audacity of the man who had hidden accounts from me for years, who had ensured I had no legal claim to our shared business, accusing me of fraud. That's fascinating coming from you, I said coolly. But any assets I currently possess were fully mine prior to our divorce and not subject to disclosure. You made certain of that with your careful financial segregation over the years. A lengthy pause. What is that supposed to mean? It means you spent 40 years ensuring I had no legal claim to anything we built together. You can hardly complain now if that arrangement occasionally works in my favor. Catherine, if you're receiving help from someone, a boyfriend perhaps. The suggestion was so absurd I actually laughed. A boyfriend? Robert, I'm 65 and was married to you for 40 years until approximately 5 minutes ago. There is no boyfriend. There is only me, managing my life without you, which seems to be causing you considerable distress. This isn't over, he said tightly before hanging up. I spent the rest of the day furnishing my new home, deliberately, selecting pieces that reflected my taste rather than Robert's preferred traditional style. Modern, clean lines, vibrant artwork, books I'd always wanted to read but never had time for. With each purchase, each decision made solely according to my preferences, I felt myself expanding into the person I might have been all along. That evening, there was another knock at my door. Expecting perhaps another of Robert's friends on a reconnaissance mission, I was surprised to find Grace Turner, a woman I vaguely recognized from the Riverside Gardens Neighborhood Association, meeting I'd attended earlier that week. Hello, she said brightly, holding a basket of muffins. Proper welcome this time. I'm Grace from 3 doors down. I would have come yesterday, but I saw you had another visitor and didn't want to overwhelm you. I smiled, genuinely this time, and invited her in. Unlike Warren, Grace didn't immediately begin inspecting my home or interrogating me about my finances. Instead, she admired my new furniture selections and asked thoughtful questions about my design choices. You have a wonderful eye, she commented, noting the abstract painting I'd hung above the fireplace. Have you always been interested in contemporary art? I've always been interested in many things, I replied, surprising myself with the candor that followed. But for the past 40 years, my preferences were largely irrelevant. Grace nodded understandingly. Ah, one of those marriages. I had one of those too once upon a time. We settled in my newly furnished living room, drinking tea and exchanging stories. Grace, I learned, had divorced her controlling husband 15 years earlier and rebuilt her life as an art appraiser. Best decision I ever made, she said, firmly, though the first few years were terrifying. How did you handle the loneliness? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Grace considered this. I discovered something surprising. I was far lonelier in my marriage than I ever was on my own. Once I stopped contorting myself to fit someone else's expectations, I found I actually enjoyed my own company. As she left hours later, Grace squeezed my hand warmly. Welcome to the neighborhood, Kathy, and welcome to the rest of your life. I slept soundly that night for the first time since the divorce. The next morning, however, brought a harsh return to reality. Jennifer was waiting outside my townhouse when I stepped out to collect the newspaper. Mom, she called, rushing up the walkway. We need to talk. I ushered her inside, noting her agitated state. Would you like coffee? No. I would like an explanation, she said tensely, pacing my living room. Dad says you've somehow accessed money that should have been part of the divorce settlement. He's consulting with his lawyers about reopening the case. I sat calmly, watching my daughter defend the man who had abandoned her mother without a second thought. Jennifer, your father ensured for 40 years that I had no legal claim to any significant assets. The divorce settlement reflected that reality. Any money I now have is legitimately mine and was never part of our marital assets. But where did it come from? She demanded. Dad says you never had independent finances. Your father doesn't know everything about me, I said simply. He never bothered to ask. Jennifer stopped pacing to stare at me. What does that mean? Are you being mysterious just to upset him? I'm not doing anything to upset him. I'm living my life. The fact that he's upset by my independence says far more about him than about me. This isn't like you, Mom, Jennifer said accusingly. You've always been reasonable, accommodating. Now suddenly you're this. Person with boundaries? I suggested. Woman with self-respect? Individual with her own legitimate interests? Jennifer flushed. That's not fair. You're twisting my words. And you're here as your father's proxy rather than as my daughter, I countered. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling about being discarded after 40 years? About watching the man I built a life with marry someone younger than my child? About losing my home, my social circle, and apparently my daughters? Loyalty in one fell swoop? Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. I didn't. She stopped, then continued in a smaller voice. I just don't want there to be more conflict. And your solution is for me to continue being reasonable and accommodating, while your father does exactly as he pleases. That's not avoiding conflict, Jennifer. That's simply ensuring the conflict doesn't inconvenience him. My daughter sank onto my new sofa, looking suddenly young and uncertain. I don't know how to navigate this, Mom. Dad's still Dad. Vanessa is. Well, she's here to stay, apparently. And you're my mother. I can't just choose sides. I never asked you to, I said more gently. But I am asking you to recognize that I have the right to rebuild my life on my own terms, without constant scrutiny or suspicion. Jennifer nodded slowly. Your new place is really nice, she offered, glancing around. The art isn't what I expected. It's bolder. I'm discovering I might be bolder than either of us expected, I replied with a small smile. After Jennifer left, I called Diane to update her on the situation. Robert is threatening legal action. He thinks I hid assets during the divorce. Diane's laugh was sharp. Let him try. Your investment was made with inherited money that was never commingled with marital assets. It's untouchable, and he knows it. He's just fishing. And if he keeps pushing? Then we push back harder, Diane said firmly. Catherine, you spent 40 years being reasonable. Where did it get you? The question lingered as I prepared for the neighborhood association meeting that evening. Where indeed had reasonableness gotten me? Discarded at 65. replaced by a younger model, nearly penniless but for my secret investment. Viewed with pity by my former social circle. Perhaps reasonableness was overrated. The meeting was held in the Riverside Gardens Community Center, a charming converted boathouse overlooking the water. As I entered, Grace waved me over to a seat she'd saved beside her. "Fair warning," she whispered as I sat down. "Warren Davis is here. Apparently, he's considering purchasing in the neighborhood." I stiffened, spotting Warren across the room. He was deep in conversation with an older man I didn't recognize, occasionally glancing in my direction. "Perfect," I muttered. "Robert's spy network expands." Grace squeezed my arm supportively. "Ignore him. He's just gathering intel for your ex." The meeting proceeded routinely until the open discussion portion, when Warren raised his hand. "I have a concern about property values," he began, his gaze sliding to me. "I'm worried about individuals purchasing homes they can't sustainably afford, leading to potential foreclosures that would impact the entire neighborhood." The implication was clear. Several heads turned toward me, the newcomer who had suspiciously purchased a $500,000 townhouse despite an acrimonious divorce. Before I could respond, Grace stood. "Warren, if you're referring to Catherine, I can assure you she purchased her home outright. No mortgage, no risk of foreclosure. Perhaps your concern is merely theoretical." Warren flushed. "I wasn't speaking of anyone specific. I'm merely suggesting that the association should have stronger financial vetting for new residents." "Interesting," Grace continued pleasantly. "I don't recall such concerns when the Hendersons moved in last year after their bankruptcy, or when the Millers arrived following their messy divorce. Is there something specific about Catherine that triggers your concern for our property values?" The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Warren sputtered, "I'm simply raising a legitimate issue." "No, you're engaging in targeted harassment at the behest of Robert Wilson," Grace said, her pleasant tone unchanged. "And as treasurer of this association, I find that inappropriate and unwelcoming." Several other members nodded in agreement. Warren, realizing he'd miscalculated, mumbled something about being misunderstood and slunk back to his seat. After the meeting, a cluster of neighbors approached to introduce themselves, many offering supportive comments or outright disapproval of Warren's behavior. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something like community forming around. Me, not as Bob's wife, but as Catherine Wilson, resident of Riverside Gardens. Warren cornered me in the parking lot as I was leaving. "That was unnecessarily dramatic," he said tightly. "I was raising a legitimate concern." "No, Warren, you were doing Robert's bidding, as usual," I replied calmly. "Just as you've always done, hosting his clients when asked, supporting his business ventures without question, even turning a blind eye when he began seeing Vanessa years before our divorce." Warren paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," I scoffed. "You and Margaret hosted dinners where Robert brought Vanessa as his executive assistant while I was caring for his dying mother. You knew exactly what was happening and said nothing." "That's marriage, Catherine," he said defensively. "Men like Robert, successful, driven men, sometimes need outlets. Margaret understands this. It's why our marriage has lasted 45 years. I stared at him, truly seeing this pitiful man for perhaps the first time. "I'm sorry for Margaret," I said finally. "And I'm sorry for you, if you truly believe that's what marriage should be." As I drove home along the waterfront, Warren's words echoed in my mind. Men like Robert sometimes need outlets. How? Many times had I made similar excuses for my husband's behavior over the years. How many times had I diminished myself to accommodate his ego, his ambitions, his needs? Pulling into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked across the street. As I exited my car, a man stepped out of the sedan, sleek, well-dressed, with the unmistakable demeanor of an attorney. "Mrs. Wilson?" he called, approaching with an envelope extended. I'm representing Robert Wilson in the matter of undisclosed marital assets. This is a formal request for financial disclosure. I took the envelope without opening it. You can tell Mr. Wilson that any further communication should go through my attorney. I handed him Helen's business card, which I'd taken to carrying for precisely this reason. The man nodded stiffly. Mrs. Wilson, it would be in your best interest to cooperate fully. Mr. Wilson is prepared to pursue this matter aggressively. Of course he is, I replied, turning toward my front door. Mr. Wilson has spent 40 years aggressively pursuing exactly what he wants. The difference now is that I am no longer obligated to give it to him. Inside, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The legal language was intimidating. Demands for bank statements, investment records, explanations of assets, threats of penalties for non-compliance. But beneath my fear burned a new, unfamiliar emotion, righteous anger. I called Helen immediately, forwarding the documents electronically while still on the phone. This is harassment, she said after reviewing them. Classic bullying tactics. He has no evidence, just suspicion, and he's hoping to intimidate you into revealing information he has no right to. What do? We counterpunch, Helen said firmly. I'll file a harassment claim and request a restraining order based on his surveillance of your home and sending Warren to intimidate you at community functions. We'll also demand all records of his own accounts, including those I suspect he hid during your divorce. Can we do that? We can certainly try, and the process will be expensive and inconvenient for him, which might make him reconsider this fishing expedition. After hanging up, I sat in my living room as darkness fell, watching the lights from passing boats ripple across the water. In just a few short weeks, my life had transformed completely, from devoted wife to discarded burden to woman under siege. But for the first time, I wasn't facing these challenges by accommodating, yielding, or sacrificing my own interests. For the first time, I was fighting back. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Neighborhood wine night tomorrow at my place, 7 p.m., no Warrens allowed. I smiled, typing back, I'll bring dessert. Then I opened my email to find a message from Diane with the subject line, Time. For Phase 2? The body contained just one line. Lunch tomorrow? I have an idea about turning the tables completely. I replied immediately, Yes, it's time. Setting my phone aside, I walked to the bay window overlooking the water. My reflection stared back. A woman I was just beginning to recognize. Not Bob's wife, not Jennifer's mother. Just Catherine Wilson, 65 years young, with fire in her eyes and $3. $2 million in her investment account. Robert wanted war? Fine, but this time, I wouldn't be surrendering. Lunch with Diane took place at Harbor Bistro, an upscale restaurant overlooking the marina. It wasn't the type of place I would have chosen during my marriage. Too modern, too bold. But now it felt perfectly aligned with my emerging identity. You look radiant, Diane remarked as I slid into the seat across from her. Crisis suits you. I laughed, surprising myself with the genuine sound. Is that a compliment or an indictment of my previous life? Both, perhaps. She studied me over her reading glasses. You spent decades dimming your light to accommodate Robert's fragile ego. Now you're finally burning at full wattage. The server approached with water and menus. After we ordered, Diane leaned forward, her expression turning serious. So, Robert is escalating his attempts to access your investment funds. I nodded, my mood dampening. He's filed a formal petition alleging I concealed assets during the divorce. Helen thinks it's a fishing expedition, but it's stressful nonetheless. Of course it is, Diane said. It's meant to be. Men like Robert don't respond well to losing control. He doesn't actually believe you hid millions during your divorce. He knows you too well for that. What he suspects is that someone is helping you financially, which challenges his narrative that you're helpless without him. I'm not accepting help from anyone, I protested. Exactly. Diane smiled. And that's what's driving him crazy. You're displaying a level of financial independence that shouldn't be possible given what he left you with. It contradicts everything. He's told himself and everyone else about your capabilities. Our salads arrived, and we paused our conversation until the server departed. So what's this idea you mentioned? I asked, spearing a cherry tomato with my fork. Diane's eyes gleamed. It's time to go from defense to offense, Catherine. You've spent weeks reacting to Robert's moves. Now it's time to make him react to yours? How? By embracing your financial independence publicly and unapologetically. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. I've been doing some research on Wilson Consulting Group. I opened the folder, scanning the contents. Financial reports, news articles, client listings. The company has been struggling for the past 2 years, Diane continued. Robert's been hiding it well, but they've lost 3 major clients to competitors. Their innovation pipeline is stagnant, and employee satisfaction ratings have plummeted since he promoted Vanessa to COO. I looked up, startled. He made her chief operating officer? She's barely been with the company 5 years. 5 years in his bed counts for a lot, apparently, Diane said dryly. The point is, the company you helped build is vulnerable right now, and you have the capital to exploit that vulnerability. What are you suggesting? That I try to damage Wilson Consulting out of spite? Diane shook her head. Not out of spite, out of justice, and good business sense. You have expertise in exactly the areas where Wilson Consulting is currently failing. You understand their internal processes, their client relationships, their weaknesses, and you have capital to invest. I stared at her, realization dawning. You want me to start a competing firm? Not just competing, Diane corrected. I want you to start a firm that specifically targets Wilson Consulting's client base with superior, more innovative services. I want you to create the company you would have built if Robert hadn't sidelined your career 40 years ago. My heart raced at the audacity of her suggestion. That would be poetic justice, Diane finished. And a sound business opportunity, the sustainable energy sector you invested in, it's booming, and those companies need consulting, services to navigate rapid growth. You already have credibility with them as an early investor. You understand their needs in a way Robert never could. I pushed my salad around my plate, mind whirling. Even if I wanted to, and I'm not saying I do, I've been out of the professional world for decades. I don't have the current skills or connections to start a consulting firm from scratch. You don't need to do it alone, Diane countered. I've taken the liberty of arranging some introductions this afternoon, if you're willing. Introductions to whom? Diane checked her D. But they should be arriving right about now. On cue, the restaurant's door opened and 3 people entered. A poised woman in her 50s, a younger man with trendy glasses, and a familiar face that made my stomach drop. Patty? I whispered, watching my friend approach our table alongside the strangers. What is this, Diane? Diane stood to greet the newcomers. Catherine, you know Patricia Reynolds, former HR director at Wilson Consulting. And this is Megan Zhao, who until last month was their marketing director, and Daniel Keats, their former innovation lead. The 3 pulled up chairs, joining our suddenly crowded table. Patty squeezed my hand reassuringly. Sorry for the cloak. And dagger, Kathy, she said quietly. But we needed to be careful about who knew we were meeting. My gaze moved between the 3 former Wilson Consulting executives. You all left the company? Megan nodded, her expression grim. I resigned after being passed over for promotion in favor of Vanessa's college roommate, a woman with literally no marketing experience. I was pushed out, Daniel added. Apparently, my innovation strategies were too risky, according to the new COO. Patty's smile was sharp. And I retired rather than implement the new HR policies Vanessa wanted, cutting retirement benefits, reducing parental leave, eliminating the mentorship program I spent years building. Robert allowed. All this? I asked, genuinely shocked. The man I'd been married to had always prided himself on being a fair, if demanding, leader. Robert is... Patty hesitated. He's not the man you knew, Kathy. Since Vanessa's promotion, he's been increasingly disengaged, leaving major decisions to her while he focuses on their wedding plans and buying a yacht. A yacht? I repeated incredulously. Robert gets seasick on the harbor ferry. Vanessa doesn't, Megan said with a raised eyebrow. And what Vanessa wants, Vanessa gets, regardless of the impact on the company. Diane cleared her throat. The point is, Catherine, you're not the only one Robert and Vanessa have cast aside. There's significant talent from Wilson Consulting currently looking for new opportunities. Talent that knows exactly how to serve those clients better than their former employer currently is. I looked at the faces around the table, expectant, determined, slightly nervous. You're seriously proposing we start a competing consulting firm? Just like that? Not just like that, Daniel corrected. We've been planning this for weeks. We have a business model, potential office space, and preliminary outreach to clients who've expressed dissatisfaction with Wilson Consulting recently. What we don't have is capital, or the perfect person to be the face of the company. Me? I almost laughed. I haven't worked professionally in 40 years. That's not entirely accurate, Patty interjected gently. You've worked continuously, for 4 decades, writing proposals, developing client relationships, editing major publications. The only thing you haven't done is receive proper credit or compensation for that work. You're the secret weapon, Catherine, Diane added. The woman behind Robert Wilson's success who was never acknowledged. That's a powerful narrative in today's business climate. My head was spinning. This is a lot to process. Of course it is, Megan said sympathetically. We don't expect an answer today, but we wanted to present the opportunity before we approached other potential investors. I took a long sip of water, trying to steady my thoughts. What would this venture require financially? Daniel slid a folder across the table. Initial capital of approximately $750,000 to secure office space, basic infrastructure, and runway for the first 6 months while we build our client base. We project profitability by month 8 if we can secure just 3 major clients from Wilson Consulting's current roster. And we already have soft commitments from 2, Megan added, contingent on our ability to launch within the next 2 months. I studied the business plan, my old business training slowly resurfacing as I analyzed the projections, market analysis, and competitive landscape. It was solid, ambitious, but grounded in realistic assessments of both the opportunity and challenges. This could work, I admitted, surprising myself. But using my connection to Robert as a selling point feels, I don't know, vindictive? It's not vindictive to claim credit for work you actually did, Diane said firmly. For 40 years, you've allowed Robert to present your contributions as his own. This isn't about revenge. It's about finally stepping into your rightful place. Our server approached to clear plates and offer dessert menus. We declined, asking instead for coffee. The interruption gave me a moment to gather my thoughts. When we were alone again, I asked the question that had been growing in my mind. Why me? Beyond the capital, why do you want me involved? There must be other investors who wouldn't come with the potential drama of being Robert's ex-wife. The 3 former executives exchanged glances. Finally, Patty spoke. Because we've all seen what you can do, Kathy. For years, we watched you. Smooth client relationships that Robert had damaged. We read your edits to his books and articles, edits that transformed mediocre work into industry-leading insights. We saw you identify promising talent that Robert initially dismissed. You have instincts for this business that can't be taught. And, Megan added, we believe in justice. What happened to you, being discarded after 4 decades of uncompensated Partnership. It's not just personally unfair. It's emblematic of how women's contributions are systematically devalued in business. By building something successful with you at the helm, we're making a statement beyond just competing with Wilson Consulting. I sat back, overwhelmed by their faith in me. For 40 years, I'd believed that supporting Robert was the most valuable contribution I could make. The idea that these accomplished professionals saw me as an asset in my own right was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make impulsively." "Of course." Daniel nodded. "We're meeting again next Wednesday to finalize our approach. If you're interested in joining us, even just to observe and ask more questions, we'd welcome your participation." As we prepared to leave, Diane pulled me aside. "Don't overthink. This, Catherine. You've spent 40 years calculating every decision based on what was best for Robert. Just this once, ask yourself, what do I want?" What did I want? The question echoed as I drove home from the restaurant. Freedom, certainly. Security, yes. But beyond that? I'd spent so long subordinating my desires to Robert's ambitions that I wasn't entirely sure what aspirations were truly mine. When I arrived home, I found another legal letter taped to my door. More demands from Robert's attorneys, more thinly veiled threats about the consequences of withholding financial information. I took it inside, added it to the growing stack of similar communications, and sat at my dining table with a fresh cup of tea. Instead of dwelling on Robert's harassment, I opened Daniel's business plan again, reviewing the projections more carefully. The concept was sound. A boutique consulting firm focused specifically on growth-stage companies in sustainable industries. Exactly the type of forward-thinking approach Robert had consistently rejected as too niche whenever I'd suggested similar specialization over the years. My phone rang. Jennifer. "Mom," she began without preamble, "are you aware of what Patty Reynolds is planning? Dad is furious." So Robert already knew about the potential competing firm. That was faster than expected. "Hello to you too, Jennifer," I replied calmly. "What exactly has your father heard?" "That Patty is poaching staff and clients for a rival consulting group, after everything Dad did for her career." Jennifer's indignation was palpable. "And apparently she had lunch with you today. Please tell me you're not involved in this betrayal." The accusation stung. Betrayal? Interesting choice of words, considering recent events. "Mom, this isn't about the divorce. This is about business ethics. Patty worked for Dad for 20 years. She owes him loyalty." "Like the loyalty he showed me after 40 years?" I countered. "Besides, employment isn't indentured servitude. Patty retired. She's free to pursue new opportunities." Jennifer made a frustrated sound. "Dad thinks you're financing this new venture. He says there's no other explanation for how you afforded your townhouse, and now this." And there it was, Robert's real concern. Not Patty's departure or potential competition, but the source of my financial independence. "Jennifer, I'm going to say this once. Your father spent decades ensuring I had no legal claim to the wealth we built together. He left me with a broken-down vacation cottage and a stipend that barely covers groceries. The fact that I've managed to build something for myself regardless seems to bother him far more than it should if he truly believed I deserved nothing." "He's worried about you," Jennifer insisted. "He thinks someone might be taking advantage." "The only person who took advantage of me was Robert," I interrupted, my patience fraying. "And I allowed it for 40 years. That time is over." After hanging up, I paced my living room, agitation building. Robert was clearly escalating, using Jennifer as his proxy, sending legal threats, probably having me followed. All because he couldn't stand not knowing where my money came from or controlling my choices. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Legal-looking fellow taking photos of your house from a car across the street. Want me to call the police?" I moved to the window, discreetly peering out. Sure enough, a man in a suit sat in a parked sedan, camera aimed at my home. Something in me snapped. 40 years of accommodation, of swallowing my anger, of putting others' needs before my own. It all crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. I was done hiding, done apologizing, done diminishing myself. I texted Grace back, "No. Need for police. I'm handling this." Then I called Helen. "I'm ready to move forward with the restraining order," I said firmly. "And I have another legal question. What's involved in starting a business?" The following morning, I drove to Diane's home for our planned follow-up discussion. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities and concerns, but I felt more energized than I had in years. "You've made a decision," Diane observed as soon as she opened the door. I nodded, stepping inside. "I'm in, but with conditions." Diane led me to her sunroom, where coffee and pastries waited. I expected nothing less. What conditions? "First, I want 51% ownership. If I'm risking my financial security and inviting Robert's wrath, I need controlling interest." "The others were hoping for equal partnership," Diane noted. "But I think they'll agree given your capital contribution." "Second, I want a clear mission statement that goes beyond just competing with Wilson Consulting. I refuse to build something defined solely in opposition to Robert." Diane smiled. "That's why you're perfect for this, Catherine. You've always seen beyond immediate conflicts to longer-term potential." "And third," I continued, "I want us to be deliberate about building something truly different, more inclusive, more innovative, more aligned with emerging needs rather than traditional corporate structures." "All reasonable conditions," Diane agreed. "Anything else?" I hesitated before voicing the final piece. "Yes, I want to do this under my maiden name, Catherine Henderson, not to hide my connection to Robert, but because I want this venture to be truly mine. A fresh start." "Catherine Henderson," Diane tested the name. "It suits you. I never thought Wilson captured your essence anyway." We spent the next 2 hours refining my approach to the Wednesday meeting, discussing everything from potential office locations to initial clients to target. By the time I left, my provisional business plan had doubled in size, filled with notes, questions, and ideas that had been dormant for decades. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Robert's Mercedes, parked across the street, so he'd finally come himself rather than sending proxies. I wasn't surprised. Robert always showed up personally when he felt truly threatened. Taking a deep breath, I exited my car and walked calmly toward my front door, ignoring him. He stepped out of his vehicle and approached rapidly. "Catherine," he called, his tone a practiced blend of concern and authority. "We need to talk." I turned, regarding him coolly. "Do we? After 6 weeks of legal harassment, surveillance, and using our daughter as your messenger, now you want to talk?" Robert had aged well, still handsome at 67, with distinguished silver at his temples and the same commanding presence that had first attracted me decades ago. But now I saw something else too, a brittleness around his eyes, a defensive set to his jaw. "This has gone far enough," he said, glancing around to ensure none of my neighbors were watching. "You need to tell me where this money came from." "No, Robert, I don't. That's the beauty of divorce. Your entitlement to explanations about my life ended the moment you decided a 20-something assistant was more valuable than 40 years of partnership." His face flushed. "This isn't about Vanessa. This is about financial disclosure and legal obligations." "Is it? Because it seems more like it's about your inability to accept that I might be capable of independence, that I might have value beyond being your unpaid support staff." "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed. "Of course you have value. I've never suggested otherwise. Except when you offered me a stipend after 4 decades of marriage. Except when you put me on a timeline to vacate my home of 30 years. Except..." when you dismissed 40 years of work as choices that entitled me to nothing. Robert shifted uncomfortably. The settlement was legally appropriate given the circumstances. You'd never worked. I worked every day of our marriage. My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. I worked without salary, without recognition, without security. I built the company alongside you, Robert. The only difference was that you got paid and I got… What? The privilege of being discarded when someone younger came along? A curtain twitched in Grace's window. Great. The neighborhood would have fresh gossip tonight. Robert lowered his voice. I understand. You're angry about the divorce. That's natural. But this vindictive campaign, buying property you shouldn't be able to afford, consorting with former employees to undermine my company, it's beneath you, Catherine. Is it? Or is it exactly what I should have done years ago, recognized my own value and acted accordingly? So you admit you're involved in Patty's venture? His eyes narrowed triumphantly. I smiled. I admit that I'm exploring professional opportunities appropriate to my experience and expertise. Beyond that, you're no longer entitled to information about my decisions. This is about revenge, he said dismissively. You're trying to hurt me because you're bitter about Vanessa. Not everything is about you, Robert. That may be the most important lesson I've learned since our divorce. A sleek black car pulled into my driveway, Helen arriving for our scheduled meeting to discuss the restraining order. Perfect timing. My attorney is here, I told Robert. Any further communication should go through her. And the surveillance needs to stop immediately, or I'll be filing harassment charges. Robert's face darkened. This isn't over, Catherine. If you're concealing assets or engaging in activity to deliberately damage Wilson Consulting, there will be serious consequences. There already have been serious consequences, Robert, I replied, turning toward Helen as she exited her car. Just not the ones you anticipated. Robert retreated to his Mercedes as Helen approached, her expression questioning. My ex-husband, I explained. Perfect timing for our discussion about that restraining order. Inside, Helen reviewed the documentation I'd gathered, photographs of the surveillance, copies of the excessive legal communications, text messages from Jennifer reporting her father's concerns. This is more than enough for a temporary restraining order, Helen confirmed, but we should discuss your business plans before proceeding. Starting a competing firm will complicate matters legally. I'm aware, I replied. But I've spent 40 years avoiding complications for Robert's benefit. I won't continue making decisions based on his convenience. Helen nodded approvingly. Then let's discuss how to structure this venture to minimize your legal exposure while maximizing your opportunity. Given your history with Wilson Consulting, we'll need to be careful about non-compete issues, intellectual property, and client solicitation. For the next 2 hours, we crafted an approach that would allow me to participate in the new venture while minimizing Robert's ability to interfere legally. By the time Helen left, I had a clear roadmap for Wednesday's meeting with Patty, Megan, and Daniel. That evening, I received an unexpected text from Jennifer. Dad said he saw you today. You seemed different. Are you okay? I stared at the message, trying to decipher its subtext. Was this genuine concern? Another attempt to gather intelligence for Robert? A daughter's tentative reach toward reconciliation? I am different, I replied carefully. And yes, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm becoming the person I might have been all along if circumstances had been different. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I miss you, Mom. A lump formed in my throat. Despite everything, despite her loyalty to Robert, Jennifer was still my daughter, the child I'd raised, loved, protected. I miss you too, I texted back. When you're ready to see me as my own person, not just as your father's ex-wife, I'm here. No response came, but I hadn't expected one. Seeds had been planted. Whether they would grow remained to be seen. Wednesday arrived clear and bright. I dressed carefully for the meeting with Patty and the others. A sleek navy pantsuit I'd purchased the day before. My first real business attire in 40 years. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the soft, accommodating woman who had faded into the background of Robert's life. In her place stood someone confident, focused, ready to lead rather than support. The meeting location was a private room at the back of Diane's favorite restaurant, neutral territory where we could speak freely without risk of being overheard by anyone in Robert's circle. I arrived 15 minutes early, reviewing my notes, and the counter-proposal I'd prepared. Patty arrived next, then Daniel, followed by Megan, and finally Diane. "Before we begin," I said once everyone was settled, "I want to be clear about my interest in this venture. I'm not doing this to compete with Robert or to seek revenge for personal grievances. I'm doing this because I believe in the business model, in our collective expertise, and in my own ability to contribute meaningfully." Nods around the table. "That said," I continued, "I have some proposed modifications to the original plan." I distributed copies of my counter-proposal, watching as they reviewed the changes, my request for majority ownership in exchange for increased capital investment, the revised mission focusing on sustainable growth companies, the suggestion that we operate under the name Henderson Strategic Partners, rather than anything referencing Wilson Consulting. "These are significant changes," Daniel noted, looking up from the document, "particularly the ownership structure." "They are," I acknowledged. "And if they're unacceptable, I understand. But after 40 years of compromising my vision to support someone else's, I'm no longer willing to enter partnerships where I don't have meaningful control over my own destiny." Megan studied me thoughtfully. "You know, when Patty first suggested approaching you, I was skeptical. I wondered if you were just Robert's shadow, someone who'd absorbed his methods without developing your own perspective." I tensed, preparing for rejection. "But this," she tapped the proposal, "this isn't Robert's approach at all. This is innovative, forward-thinking, aligned with where business consulting actually needs to go, rather than where it's been." "I'm in." "As am I," Patty added. "The ownership structure is reasonable given your capital contribution, and frankly, your industry knowledge is deeper than you give yourself credit for." Daniel still looked uncertain. "The increased focus on sustainability and ethical growth. It limits our potential client base." "Initially, yes," I conceded. "But it positions us for the future in a way that generalist firms like Wilson Consulting aren't prepared for. We're not just offering tactical business advice. We're helping build companies that will thrive in an economy increasingly driven by sustainability concerns." He nodded slowly. "It's a risk, but a calculated one." He extended his hand. "I'm in too." "Then it's settled," Diane smiled. "Henderson Strategic Partners is born." As we toasted with sparkling water, it was, after all, a business meeting. I felt a surge of something unfamiliar, pride untethered from anyone else's achievements. This wasn't about supporting Robert's vision or facilitating his success. This was about creating something that reflected my own values, my own insights, my own understanding of what business could and should be. For the next 3 hours, we hammered out details, office location options, initial staffing plans, marketing approach, target client list. By the time we adjourned, Henderson Strategic Partners had moved from concept to concrete plan, with a tentative launch date just 6 weeks away. As I drove home, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Catherine Wilson?" a male voice inquired when I answered via Bluetooth. "Yes?" "This is James Berkowitz from the Boston Business Journal. I'm working on a story about a new consulting firm being established by former Wilson Consulting executives. I understand you're involved." My heart raced. How had the press already gotten wind of our plans? We'd been deliberately discreet. "I'm sorry, Mr. Berkowitz, but I have no comment at this time on any business ventures I may or may not be exploring. Ms. Wilson, our sources indicate you're providing significant capital for this new firm despite having no professional background. Given your recent divorce from Robert Wilson, this appears to be a revenge-motivated— I cut him off. Mr. Berkowitz, I have a business degree from Boston University and 40 years of experience in strategic consulting, albeit without formal recognition. Any venture I undertake is based on sound business judgment, not personal vendettas. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm driving. I ended the call, mind whirling. Robert must have leaked the story, trying to frame the narrative before we could announce on our own terms. Classic Robert strategy: control the information flow, shape public perception preemptively. But this time, he'd miscalculated. Because Catherine Henderson, was no longer playing by his rules. I pulled into my driveway and immediately called Megan. The business journal is already sniffing around. We need to accelerate our timeline and control our own narrative. I was afraid of this, Megan sighed. Robert still has friends in business. Media, what's your instinct? My instinct. When was the last time anyone had asked for that rather than assuming Robert would make the decision? We go bold, I said decisively. Full launch announcement next week. But we lead with our vision, not our connection to Wilson Consulting. We're not former Wilson executives starting a competitive firm. We're industry veterans launching an innovative approach to strategic consulting for the sustainable economy. I like it, Megan replied, excitement evident in her voice. Let me draft something and circulate it to the team tonight. As I ended the call and entered my home, I noticed an envelope had been slipped under my door. Another legal threat from Robert, no doubt. But when I opened it, I found something entirely different. A handwritten note from Jennifer. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation, about seeing you as your own person. I'd like to try. Dinner next week, just us? I held the note against my chest, emotion welling. Perhaps the seeds planted were sprouting already. My phone buzzed again, an email notification. From James Berkowitz at the Business Journal. Ms. Wilson, thank you for your time earlier. Upon further research, I've discovered your business, background and contributions to Wilson Consulting that weren't previously in my notes. I'd like to offer you the opportunity for a proper interview about Henderson Strategic Partners and your vision for the firm. This could help present a more balanced perspective than the initial information I received. Please let me know if you're interested. I smiled, forwarding the email to Megan with a simple note. The narrative is already shifting. Standing in my living room purchased with my money, decorated to my taste, I felt the full weight of the transformation underway. After 40 years of existing primarily in relation to Robert, I was emerging as myself. Catherine Henderson, founder, investor, visionary. The woman I might always have been if I'd made different choices all those years ago. The woman I still had time to become. The week leading up to our public launch was a whirlwind of activity. We secured office space in a renovated industrial building overlooking the harbor. Open, airy, with none of the stuffy mahogany and leather that characterized Wilson Consulting's headquarters. Megan coordinated with a designer to create our brand identity, clean, forward-looking, with a subtle nod to sustainability in our earth-toned logo. Daniel assembled a technology infrastructure that made Robert's outdated systems look positively ancient. And I transformed. Each day brought new decisions that were entirely mine to make. Which office would be mine? What furniture reflected our company values? How should we structure our initial client presentations? After decades of deferring to Robert's preferences, the constant decision-making was simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. You're a natural at this, Patty remarked, as she watched me review design proposals for our website. It's like watching someone remember how to ride a bicycle after years away from it. I glanced up, smiling. It feels more like learning to fly after a lifetime of walking. I keep waiting for someone to correct me, to tell me I'm doing it wrong. That someone was always Robert, Patty said gently, and he's not here anymore. 3 days before our scheduled launch, I received an unexpected visitor at the partially furnished office. I was alone, reviewing our financial projections, when the temporary receptionist called up. "Ms. Henderson, there's a Ms. Wilson here. To see you. She doesn't have an appointment." My heart jumped. "Jennifer? Send her up, please." I straightened my desk, smoothed my hair, and took a deep breath. This was the first time Jennifer had sought me out since the divorce, and I had no idea what to expect. The elevator doors opened, and my daughter stepped out, looking around curiously at the construction still in progress. She wore a tailored suit reminiscent of Robert's preferred style, conservative, expensive, designed to convey authority. "Mom," she said, approaching tentatively, "this is impressive." I stood, uncertain whether to hug her or maintain professional distance. "Thank you. We're still getting settled, but it's coming together." Jennifer glanced at the view of the harbor through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Dad said you were involved in some small venture, but this—" She gestured around the spacious office. "This is serious." "It is," I confirmed, sitting down, and indicating she should take the chair opposite. "Henderson Strategic Partners is very real, and launching officially on Monday." Jennifer sat, placing her handbag carefully beside her. "That's actually why I'm here. Dad received a press release. He's concerned." Of course he was. Our press release had gone out that morning, a carefully crafted announcement of our new firm, highlighting our focus on sustainable businesses and ethical growth strategies. It mentioned that our founding team included former executives from Wilson Consulting, but positioned this as a natural evolution of expertise rather than a competitive split. "What specifically concerns him?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "The client list you've included. 3 of them are currently contracted with Wilson Consulting. They've indicated they're exploring options," I clarified. "We haven't signed contracts yet." "Mom," Jennifer leaned forward, lowering her voice as if we might be overheard in the empty office. "Do you understand what you're doing? These are Dad's clients. Some he's had for decades." "They're not Dad's clients," I corrected. "They're businesses making decisions based on their needs. If they're considering us, it's because they believe we offer something Wilson Consulting doesn't." "This will hurt him," Jennifer insisted. "Financially, yes, but also his reputation. The industry will see this as his ex-wife taking revenge." I studied my daughter, noting how thoroughly she'd absorbed Robert's perspective. In her world, any action I took that didn't prioritize his interests was automatically interpreted as vindictive. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "I understand. Loyalty to your father, but try just for a moment to see this from my perspective. After 40 years of contributing to his company without recognition or compensation, I'm finally building something of my own. Should I limit that based on his feelings? Would he do the same for me?" She flushed. "That's different." "Is it? When he left me for Vanessa, did he consider how it would hurt me? When he offered a settlement that barely covered basic expenses, was he concerned about my welfare? When he had me followed and legally harassed, was he being considerate?" "He was protecting his interests," Jennifer said defensively. "And now I'm advancing mine," I replied simply. "Not to hurt him, but because I believe in what we're building here." Jennifer fell silent, glancing around the office again with new eyes. "You really mean that, don't you? This isn't about Dad at all." "It's about me," I confirmed. "About finally acknowledging my own capabilities and ambitions. About creating something that reflects my values, not just supporting someone else's vision. Dad said you'd never worked, that you couldn't possibly run a business. Jennifer admitted. But this seems so natural for you. I've always worked, Jennifer. I just wasn't paid. I softened my tone. Your father isn't a villain. He's a man of his generation who believed his success was entirely his own creation. And I let him believe that for 40 years because that's what women of my generation were taught to do. We're both products of our time. So what happens now? Jennifer asked. He's preparing legal action, non-compete violations, client solicitation, trade secrets, the works. I nodded, unsurprised. We've anticipated that. Our attorneys are prepared. Jennifer stood, gathering her handbag. I should go. I wanted to see for myself what was happening. Dad's version seemed incomplete, I suggested. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Something. Like that? She paused at the door. Are we still on for dinner next week? Just us? Absolutely, I replied, warmth flooding my chest. I'm looking forward to it. After Jennifer left, I sat for a long time staring out at the harbor, watching boats navigate the channel. Robert was mobilizing his legal arsenal, as expected. The next weeks would be challenging, possibly ugly. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of his disapproval or anger. I was standing on solid ground, my ground. The official launch of Henderson Strategic Partners took place on a Monday morning with more media attention than we'd anticipated. The Boston Business Journal ran a feature highlighting our focus on sustainable industries. The local business podcast requested interviews with our founding team. Even the national business press picked up the story, framing it as veteran executives charting new territory in ethical consulting. None mentioned revenge or bitterness. None painted me as Robert's disgruntled ex-wife. Instead, I was Catherine Henderson, described as a longtime strategic advisor with deep expertise in client relations and organizational development. It was as if the professional identity I'd been denied for decades had suddenly materialized, visible and valued. The office buzzed with excitement as our team, now grown to 12 with recent hires, gathered for a champagne toast. To Henderson Strategic Partners, Patty said, raising her glass, and to Catherine, who reminded us all that it's never too late to claim your rightful place. Glasses clinked as congratulations circulated. Even in this moment of triumph, I felt oddly calm. Not elated, but deeply satisfied, as if I'd finally aligned with a truth that had been waiting patiently for me to recognize it. The celebration was interrupted by a call from our temporary receptionist. Ms. Henderson, Robert Wilson is in the lobby demanding to see you. He's quite insistent. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. This was the confrontation we'd expected, though perhaps not quite so soon. Send him up, I said calmly. But he sees me alone. Despite protests from Patty and Megan, I held firm. This is between Robert and me. It always has been. I waited in my office, standing behind my desk rather than sitting. This encounter needed to happen on equal footing. When Robert stormed, in moments later, his face flushed with anger, I was struck by how small he suddenly seemed. Not physically, he still cut the same imposing figure, but in presence, as if some essential inflation had been punctured. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded without preamble. Building a business, I replied evenly. Something I've had considerable experience with, though never proper credit. With my clients, my former employees, using methodologies developed at Wilson Consulting. I shook my head. Your clients are making their own decisions. Your former employees left because they were undervalued. And the methodologies you're referring to? Many of them were my creation in the first place. Robert scoffed. Your creation? You were a housewife who occasionally attended company functions. I was your uncredited partner, I corrected. I edited your books. I refined your proposals. I cultivated relationships with clients' families that kept them loyal through difficult periods. I identified promising talent you initially dismissed, including, if you recall, Patty herself. This is absurd, he sputtered. You can't seriously believe. I have copies, I interrupted calmly, of your manuscripts before and after my edits, of emails where you solicited my feedback on strategic decisions, of thank you notes from clients mentioning specifically how my involvement strengthened their trust in the firm. His face paled slightly. Where did you get those? I kept them, I said simply. Not for leverage or with any plan to use them. Simply as evidence for myself that my work mattered, even if it wasn't acknowledged. Robert's posture changed, his attack mode shifting to calculation. What do you want, Catherine? Money? Is that what this is about? Because if you're trying to force a renegotiation of our settlement, I'm not interested in your money, Robert. I have my own. So I've gathered, he said tightly, though I'm still waiting for an explanation of where these mysterious funds came from. I smiled slightly. And you'll continue waiting. My finances are no longer your concern. They are when you use them to deliberately damage my company, he snapped. This, he gestured around my office, is a transparent attempt to punish me for the divorce. Is that really the only explanation you can conceive? I asked, genuinely curious. That anything I do must revolve around you? That I couldn't possibly have ambitions or capabilities of my own? Don't twist my words, he growled. You spent 40 years as a housewife. Now suddenly you're a business mogul? It's preposterous. What's preposterous is that you actually believe your success was entirely your own creation, I replied, my calm slipping. That the woman who stood behind you for 40 years, editing, advising, networking, smoothing, contributed nothing of value. That's what's truly absurd, Robert. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed. No, I corrected. I've remembered. The woman I was before I started making myself smaller to accommodate your ego. Robert's expression hardened again. This ends now. You're using proprietary information, interfering with existing client relationships, and violating the non-compete agreements that everyone at Wilson Consulting signs. I never signed a non-compete, I pointed out. I was never officially employed, remember? That was your choice, not mine. Patty and the others did, he countered, and I'll bury them in litigation. You could do that, I agreed. Or you could recognize that the business landscape is changing, that there's room for both firms to thrive serving different market segments, that a public legal battle will only damage Wilson Consulting's reputation further at a time when client confidence is already wavering. Robert's eyes narrowed. What do you know about client confidence at my firm? I know the Mason account is teetering because Vanessa dismissed their sustainability concerns as trendy nonsense. I know Westlake Industries is frustrated by repeated staff turnover on their account. And I know North Star Capital has been quietly exploring alternatives since you cut the research team that was their primary point of value. His jaw clenched. How do you? I know because people talk to me, Robert. They always have. You were just too busy taking credit to notice. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the weight of 40 years between us. Not just the betrayal and divorce, but the daily small dismissals, the consistent undervaluation, the persistent belief that his success was his alone. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice tight. This isn't over. It can be, I replied. There's no need for mutually assured destruction. Henderson Strategic Partners is focusing on emerging companies in sustainable industries, clients you've consistently deemed too small or too niche. We're not targeting Wilson Consulting's core client base. 3 of my major clients were mentioned in your press release, he countered. Because they approached us, I said firmly. Not because we pursued them. If your clients are looking elsewhere, Robert, perhaps the question isn't what I'm doing wrong, but what you're doing wrong. His face flushed again. I've built Wilson Consulting into an industry leader, 40 years of reputation and excellence. Yes, you have, I agreed. And now you're at a crossroads. You can engage in a bitter public battle with your ex-wife's firm, alienating potential clients and confirming the whispers about your outdated approach. Or you can refocus on your core strengths, acknowledge that the market is evolving, and adapt accordingly. Robert's expression shifted between rage and calculation. Always the strategic thinker, even in personal confrontations. I want a non-competition agreement, he said finally. A formal document outlining which clients and market segments each firm will focus on. I nodded slowly. That's reasonable. I'll have our attorneys draft something for review. And public. Acknowledgement that Wilson Consulting's methodologies remain its intellectual property. As long as it's equally acknowledged that my contributions to those methodologies over 40 years grant me the right to apply similar approaches in different contexts. Robert's mouth tightened, but he nodded curtly. Fine. Our lawyers can sort out the details. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Robert? He paused, looking back with guarded eyes. You built something remarkable, I said honestly. No one denies that. But you didn't do it alone. None of us do. Something flickered across his face. Perhaps the first recognition that his narrative of solo achievement might have gaps. But it vanished quickly, replaced by his typical mask of confident authority. My attorney will contact yours, he said stiffly, and left. I sank into my chair, the accumulated tension of the confrontation finally hitting me. For 40 years, I'd centered my existence around avoiding Robert's displeasure, around supporting his needs and ambitions, standing firm against him, asserting my own value and vision. It was both terrifying and strangely liberating. The door opened cautiously, and Patty peered in. All clear? I nodded, managing a smile. We're negotiating terms rather than heading straight to court. Progress, I think. Patty entered, followed by Megan and Daniel. What's his bottom line? A non-competition agreement defining clear territories for each firm, and acknowledgement that Wilson Consulting's methodologies remain their intellectual property. Daniel whistled softly. That's surprisingly reasonable, given how he stormed in here. Robert is many things, but he's not stupid, I said. A public legal battle would damage Wilson Consulting at a vulnerable time. And frankly, our focus on sustainable industries isn't really competing with his traditional client base anyway. So he backs down, saving face by getting a non-compete that essentially formalizes what we were already planning, Megan summarized. Clever. It's what he does, I said, a hint of admiration despite everything. Finds a way to frame retreat as strategic advance. Over the next 2 weeks, our attorneys negotiated the details of the agreement. Wilson Consulting would retain its focus on established industries, manufacturing, finance, traditional energy. Henderson Strategic Partners would specialize in emerging sectors, particularly sustainable technologies, renewable energy, and ethical supply chain development. The 3 disputed clients would be allowed to choose, with both firms presenting their proposals without disparaging the other. It was civil, professional, and entirely unexpected given how bitterly the divorce had unfolded. I couldn't help wondering what had prompted Robert's relatively reasonable approach. Had Jennifer's visit to our offices influenced him? Had Vanessa, with her Harvard MBA, recognized the business sense in avoiding protracted public conflict? Or had something shifted in Robert himself when confronted with the reality that I was neither helpless nor bitter, just finally self-actualized? Meanwhile, Henderson Strategic Partners flourished. Our focus on sustainable industries resonated with a growing segment of the market that traditional firms like Wilson Consulting had largely ignored. By our 1-month anniversary, we had signed contracts with 7 clients, including 2 of the 3 who had been considering leaving Wilson Consulting. The third, interestingly, chose to remain with Robert's firm after he personally took over their account from Vanessa and implemented several of the sustainability initiatives they'd been requesting for years. On the morning we were scheduled to sign the final non-competition agreement, I received an unexpected email from Vanessa. Catherine, I know we're not supposed to be in direct contact, but I wanted to reach out personally. What you've built, in just a month, is remarkable. The focus on sustainability is exactly what I tried to advocate for at Wilson Consulting, but Robert was resistant until recently. I'm not asking for anything, just acknowledging your achievement and letting you know that your success has already changed things at your former company. Whether he admits it or not, Robert is learning from your example. V. I stared at the message, unsure how to interpret it. Was this a genuine olive branch? A strategic move to gather information? A young woman recognizing a path that might have been closed to her without an older woman breaking barriers first? After consideration, I replied briefly, Vanessa, thank you for your note. Change is often difficult but ultimately necessary for growth. I wish you and Wilson Consulting continued success in your evolution. Catherine. Professional, neutral, but not unkind. Whatever my feelings about Vanessa's role in the end of my marriage, business was business. And women in business had enough challenges without undermining each other unnecessarily. The signing ceremony for the non-compete agreement took place at a neutral location, a conference room at our mutual attorney's office building. I arrived early, my team assembled and documents reviewed. Robert arrived precisely on time, flanked by his attorney and, surprisingly, Vanessa. No one else from Wilson Consulting attended. Catherine. He nodded stiffly as we took our places, at opposite sides of the conference table. Robert, I replied calmly. Vanessa. She offered a tight smile but remained silent, her role clearly that of observer rather than participant. The attorneys guided us through the documents, highlighting key provisions and ensuring both parties understood the terms. It was straightforward, professional, devoid of the emotional charge that had characterized our interactions since the divorce. As Robert signed the final page and slid the document across to me, our eyes met briefly. For a fleeting moment, I glimpsed something unexpected, not anger or resentment, but a flicker of something almost like respect. Henderson Strategic Partners is an interesting name choice, he commented as I completed my signature. Your maiden name. Yes, I confirmed. It seemed appropriate for a fresh start. He nodded slowly. Jennifer mentioned you're having dinner tonight. We are, I replied, surprised he'd brought up our daughter in this context. Just the 2 of us. Good, he said, and for once, he seemed entirely sincere. She needs her mother, always has. Before I could respond to this unexpected sentiment, Robert gathered his papers and stood. The terms are settled then. Wilson Consulting and Henderson Strategic Partners will focus on their respective market segments without interference. Agreed, I said, rising as well. I believe this arrangement benefits both firms. We'll see, he replied, a hint of his usual competitive edge returning. The market ultimately decides winners and losers. The market is large enough for different approaches, Robert, I said mildly. Not everything needs to be a zero-sum game. He gave me a long, considering look. Perhaps. That's not how I was taught to think about business. Me neither, I acknowledged. But I'm learning there are other models, other ways to measure success beyond dominating competitors. Something shifted in his expression. Not agreement, exactly, but a momentary openness to the concept. Then it was gone, replaced by his typical mask of confident authority. We should go, he said to Vanessa, who had remained silent throughout. Board meeting at 11. She nodded, gathering her things. As they turned to leave, she paused briefly, beside me. "Congratulations on your launch," she said quietly. "The sustainability focus is visionary." Before I could respond, she followed Robert from the room, leaving me with the distinct impression that all was not harmonious in their relationship. The thought brought no satisfaction, only a distant sadness for patterns repeating. My team and I returned to our offices, the signed agreement officially marking the end of potential legal conflict with Wilson Consulting. It felt like closing a chapter, not just of potential business litigation, but of the personal battle that had consumed my energy since the divorce. "Well, that's that," Patty remarked as we entered our building. "Surprisingly civilized, all things considered." "Robert's a businessman first," I replied. "Always has been. Once he calculated the costs of a public battle versus a negotiated settlement, the decision was obvious." "Still," Megan added, "there was a moment there when he almost seemed respectful." I smiled slightly. "Robert respects strength and strategy, always has. He just never expected those qualities from me." That evening, I met Jennifer at a small Italian restaurant far from both our usual haunts. Neutral territory, like the conference room earlier that day. "Dad told me about the agreement," she said after we'd ordered. "He seemed not happy, exactly, but satisfied with the outcome." "It was a reasonable compromise," I agreed. "Both firms can move forward without unnecessary conflict." Jennifer studied me over her wineglass. "He also said something odd, that you'd taught him something about business he hadn't considered before." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Did he elaborate?" "Not really. Just that sometimes creating new value is better than fighting over existing pieces of the pie." It wasn't very dad-like, honestly. I smiled, recognizing my own words from the signing meeting reflected back. People can surprise you, even after 40 years. "Like, you've surprised me," Jennifer said softly. "Mom, I owe you an apology. When Dad first told me about the divorce, I was so focused on keeping the peace, on not losing my relationship with either of you, that I failed to consider what you were experiencing. How devastating it must have been." "It was," I acknowledged. "But in hindsight, it was also necessary. I'd lost myself in supporting your father's dreams. I needed to rediscover my own." "And now you have," she gestured expansively, as if Henderson Strategic Partners was visible from our table. "You're thriving in ways I never imagined. Ways Dad never imagined either." "Ways I never imagined," I admitted. "If you'd told me 6 months ago that I'd be running my own consulting firm at 65, I'd have thought you were delusional." Will you tell me now?" Jennifer asked hesitantly. "Where the money came from. Not because Dad wants to know, but because I'm genuinely curious how you managed to build this new life so quickly." I considered the question, weighing trust against caution. But this was my daughter, not Robert's proxy. And perhaps understanding my journey might help her avoid similar pitfalls in her own life. 5 years ago, I began, I received a small inheritance when my mother passed. About $75,000. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was the first money that had ever been truly mine, not jointly held with your father. Jennifer nodded, listening intently. "Diane advised me to invest it independently, to have something that was just mine. So I did, in a sustainable energy startup that one of her former students had founded. It was high risk, but I believed in the concept. That company went public last year, and my modest investment grew to just over $2 million. Jennifer's eyes widened. 3.2, and Dad never knew? "It was the one financial decision I made entirely on my own," I confirmed. "The one asset that wasn't commingled with our marital property. When the divorce came, it wasn't included because it had never been part of our joint finances." "And that's what funded all this? The townhouse? The company? Everything?" I nodded. It gave me options I wouldn't have had otherwise. The freedom to decline a humiliating settlement and build something of my own instead. Jennifer shook her head slowly. It's like something from a movie. The Secret Fortune, the dramatic reinvention. Except it wasn't about reinvention, I corrected. Gently. It was about finally becoming who I always was beneath the roles I'd accepted. The woman with the business degree, with strategic insight, with entrepreneurial instincts. She was always there, just waiting for permission to emerge. From Dad? From myself, I said quietly. That was the hardest permission to grant. Jennifer reached across the table, taking my hand in a gesture more intimate than any we'd shared since the divorce. I'm proud of you, Mom, and I'm sorry I didn't see your strength sooner. Tears pricked behind my eyelids, unexpected and overwhelming. After months of conflict, of rebuilding, of proving myself, my daughter's recognition touched something deeper than professional achievement ever could. Thank you, I managed, squeezing her hand. That means more than you know. As we finished, our meal, conversation flowing more easily than it had in years, I felt another piece of my new life click into place. Not perfect, not without complications, but authentic in a way my previous existence had never been. Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to part ways, Jennifer hugged me impulsively. Can we do this again next week? There's so much I want. To hear about your company, your vision. I'd love that, I replied, holding her close for a moment longer than necessary. And Jennifer? Whatever happens between your father and me, you never have to choose sides. Love isn't a zero-sum game, either. She pulled back, smiling through tears that mirrored my own. Another non-competitive agreement? Exactly, I laughed. The most important one. Driving home along the waterfront, I passed Wilson Consulting's imposing headquarters, windows illuminated against the night sky. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the dinner parties, the client meetings, the late nights editing Robert's presentations. 40 years of investment in someone else's dream. But for the first time, I felt no bitterness, no regret. Those years had shaped me, prepared me in ways I was only now beginning to fully appreciate. They weren't wasted. They were preparation for this. My own vision, my own company, my own life. As I pulled into my driveway at Riverside Gardens, I noticed a package on my doorstep. Inside, I found a bottle of champagne with a note from Grace. To new beginnings, continued success, and the satisfaction of proving them all wrong. Your neighbor and biggest fan. I smiled, carrying the bottle inside. Tomorrow, I would take it to the office to share with my team as we celebrated our first major milestone: survival, independence, and the beginning of what promised to be an extraordinary second act. Standing at my window overlooking the water, glass in hand, I toasted myself silently. Not Catherine Wilson, devoted wife. Not even Catherine Henderson, successful entrepreneur. Just Catherine, finally, completely, unapologetically herself. 1 year after launching Henderson Strategic Partners, I stood at the podium of the Boston Women in Business Awards, hardly believing the journey that had brought me there. The audience, hundreds of professional women ranging from recent graduates to seasoned executives, watched attentively as I prepared to accept the Innovator of the Year award. When I was 22, I began. I had 3 job offers and a business degree. I believed my professional path was clear. Then I fell in love, got married, and made a choice that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, to support my husband's career instead of pursuing my own. The room was silent, many women nodding in recognition of this familiar pattern. For 40 years, I channeled my education, my insights, my creativity into building someone else's dream. I edited books published under his name. I developed strategies he presented as his own. I nurtured client relationships that sustained his company through difficult periods. And I did it willingly, believing that our success was shared, even if my contributions remained invisible to the world. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Then at 65, I found myself divorced, nearly penniless, and facing a future very different from the one I'd envisioned. I had a choice: accept the narrative that I was merely an aging ex-wife with no relevant skills, or reclaim the professional identity I'd set aside decades earlier. A ripple of applause began, growing stronger as I continued. Henderson Strategic. Partners was born not from bitterness or revenge, but from recognition of my own worth, of market needs unmet by traditional firms, of the value that comes from honoring all voices at the table. Our focus on sustainable industries isn't just environmentally responsible, it's good business. Our commitment to ethical growth isn't just morally satisfying, it's financially sound. I gestured to my team seated at tables near the front: Patty, Megan, Daniel, and the 23 additional employees we'd hired over the past year. This award recognizes innovation. But the most innovative thing about our company isn't our business model or our client approach. It's the simple belief that it's never too late to claim your rightful place in the world. That wisdom accumulated over decades has value, even when, perhaps especially when, it hasn't been properly recognized. The applause was thunderous. Now. I spotted Jennifer in the audience, clapping with tears in her eyes. Beside her sat Kevin, whose initial dismissiveness had gradually transformed into grudging respect as our firm's reputation grew. Grace and several other Riverside Gardens neighbors had come to support me as well. And in the back, partially obscured but unmistakable, stood Robert. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. No animosity now, just a complex acknowledgement of our shared history and separate futures. I accept this award on behalf of every woman who has ever dimmed her light to let someone else shine. May we all find the courage to blaze at full wattage, whatever our age or circumstances. Thank you. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming. As I returned to my seat, congratulations flowing from every direction, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because my journey was finished, far from it, but because I had finally integrated all parts of myself. The supportive wife I had been, the business leader I was becoming, and the wisdom that came from embracing both identities. The award ceremony concluded with networking and celebration. I was deep in conversation with a promising young entrepreneur when I felt a presence at my elbow. Robert, looking distinguished as always, but somehow less imposing than he once had. "Congratulations, Catherine," he said, extending his hand formally. "The award is well-deserved." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by his presence. "I didn't expect to see you here." A slight shrug. "Jennifer mentioned it. I thought it seemed appropriate to acknowledge your achievement." An acknowledgement that would have meant everything to me a year ago now felt simply pleasant, an appreciated courtesy rather than desperately needed validation. "How are things at Wilson Consulting?" I asked, genuinely curious. Our non-competition agreement had largely kept our firms in separate spheres, though industry gossip occasionally filtered through. "Evolving," he admitted. "We've implemented some changes, sustainability initiatives, more diverse leadership. It's been educational." I smiled slightly. Change usually is. An awkward pause followed. Decades of intimate knowledge and recent estrangement creating a conversational chasm neither of us quite knew how to bridge. "Your speech," he said finally, "about dimming your light. Was that how you felt all those years?" The question surprised me. Not just its content, but the vulnerability behind it. The Robert I had known rarely questioned his perceptions. "Not consciously," I replied honestly. "At the time, it felt like a natural exchange. My support for your ambition, Our collective success, even if only your name was on the letterhead. It's only in retrospect that I recognize how much of myself I set aside. He nodded slowly. I never asked you to do that. No, I agreed, but you accepted it readily enough. As did I. We were both products of our time, Robert. Another silence, less awkward now, but weighted with recognition. Vanessa and I are taking some time apart, he said abruptly. She has perspectives on partnership I wasn't prepared for. I suppressed a knowing smile. Of course she did. A Harvard MBA with ambitions of her own would hardly follow my path of invisible support. I'm sorry to hear that, I said neutrally. Are you? His gaze was direct, challenging. Yes, I replied, surprising myself with my sincerity. Despite everything, I wouldn't wish the pain of failed partnership on anyone. Not even you. Not even her. Something in his expression softened. Not quite vulnerability, but a momentary lowering of defenses. Always more gracious than I deserve, he murmured. That much hasn't changed. Before I could respond, Jennifer appeared at my side, champagne flutes in hand. Mom, everyone's asking to toast with you. Oh, Dad, I didn't realize you were actually coming. Just briefly, Robert said, stepping back. I've said what I came to say. Congratulations again, Catherine. The award is well-deserved. As he disappeared into the crowd, Jennifer handed me a champagne flute, eyes curious. What was that about? Closure, perhaps, I replied thoughtfully. Or as close as we're likely to get. The celebration continued late into the evening. By the time I returned home, exhaustion and exhilaration had blended into a peaceful contentment. I kicked off my heels in the foyer of my townhouse, now fully furnished and personalized in ways my former home had never been. On my dining table sat a small wrapped package that hadn't been there when I left. The card attached read simply, "A belated recognition, R." Inside, I found a first edition copy of his most successful book, the one I had essentially rewritten from his rough draft decades earlier. He had inscribed it, "To Catherine, whose insights shaped these pages more than either of us acknowledged. At the time. With respect and gratitude, Robert." I traced my fingers over the inscription, emotion welling unexpectedly. Not longing or regret, but something gentler, appreciation for this small recognition, however belated, of my invisible contributions. The following morning, Henderson Strategic Partners convened for our weekly leadership meeting. As we reviewed our latest client acquisitions and project updates, I found myself observing my team with deep satisfaction. Patty's mentorship of younger staff, Megan's innovative marketing approaches, Daniel's technological vision, all flowing together in a company culture that valued collaboration over competition, diverse perspectives over hierarchical authority. Before we adjourn, I said as the meeting wound down, I'd like to share some thoughts that have been percolating since last night's award ceremony. All eyes turned to me attentively. When we founded this firm, part of our mission was proving something to ourselves, to the market, perhaps even to Wilson Consulting. We've done that successfully, but now I believe we're ready for the next evolution, moving beyond proving our worth to maximizing our impact. Nods around the table encouraged me to continue. I'm proposing we establish the Henderson Initiative, a program offering pro bono consulting services to women-led startups in sustainable industries, particularly those founded by women over 50 who face unique barriers to funding and support. Women like you were a year ago, Patty noted with a smile. Exactly, I acknowledged. Women with valuable experience and insights who need just a bit of structural support to realize their vision. This aligns perfectly with our brand, Megan said, already jotting notes, and creates wonderful narrative opportunities about paying it forward. It's not just about narrative, I clarified. It's about creating the support I wish I'd had, the recognition and validation that might have allowed me to step into my capabilities decades earlier. Daniel, ever practical, asked, "Budget implications?" "I'm personally funding the initial phase," I replied. 5% of my ownership stake will be transferred to create an endowment for the initiative. Long-term, I envision corporate partnerships to sustain and expand it. The discussion that followed was energetic, collaborative, full of refinements and expansions to my initial concept. This was what I valued most about our company culture. Ideas weren't dictated from above but enriched through collective wisdom. As we adjourned, Patty lingered behind. "You know, when you first agreed to join our venture, I thought it was primarily about financial independence, having something that was truly yours after 40 years of supporting Robert." "That was certainly part of it," I acknowledged. "But it's evolved into something more profound," she continued. "You're not just building a successful business, you're creating a legacy that will benefit women you'll never even meet." The observation touched me deeply. Perhaps that's the privilege of starting this journey at 65. I'm not building for myself alone, but for all the women who might otherwise diminish their light as I once did. Later that week, I had dinner with Jennifer and Kevin at their newly renovated home. Our relationship had steadily strengthened. Over the past year, moving beyond the awkwardness of the divorce to a more authentic connection than we'd had in years. "The Henderson Initiative is brilliantly conceived," Jennifer said as we enjoyed coffee after dessert. "Dad mentioned it, actually. He seemed impressed." "Did he?" I raised an eyebrow, surprised that Robert was following our developments so closely. Jennifer nodded. "He's different lately. More reflective. The separation from Vanessa has been clarifying for him, I think." "How are you feeling about that?" I asked carefully, conscious of how difficult the past year had been. For Jennifer, caught between her parents' new realities, she considered the question thoughtfully. "Honestly? Relieved. Vanessa was never. It never felt right. And watching Dad struggle with a partner who refused to subordinate her ambitions to his..." She glanced at me apologetically. "Well, it's been educational for all of us." Kevin, who had been quieter than usual all evening, suddenly spoke. "I owe you an apology, Catherine. When all this began, I saw you as an inconvenience, a complication in a straightforward business matter. I completely failed to recognize what you'd contributed or what you were capable of." His candor surprised me. "That's very honest, Kevin. Thank you." Working in finance, I'm surrounded by men who've built careers on unacknowledged female support, he continued. Watching your journey this past year has made me question how many brilliant women have been sidelined in my own industry, including perhaps my own wife. Jennifer reached for his hand, a silent communication passing between them. "We've been doing some thinking," she said, turning back to me. "About partnership, about careers, about what marriage really means in practice rather than theory." "Oh?" I prompted gently. "I'm going back to school," Jennifer announced, "for my MBA. Kevin's taking the lead on childcare for a while once we start our family. We're trying to create something more equal than what we grew up observing." Pride swelled in my chest, not just for Jennifer's decision, but for the thoughtful recalibration of their marriage it represented. Perhaps my journey had catalyzed something beyond my own transformation. "I think that's wonderful," I said sincerely. "And I'm here to support you both however I can." Driving home that night, I reflected on the unexpected ripples of my late-life reinvention. A year ago, I had been focused solely on survival, emotional and financial. Now I was thriving in ways I couldn't have imagined, and my example was influencing others to reconsider their own assumptions and choices. At 66, I had finally learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true power comes not from control or dominance, but from authentic self-expression. From using your unique gifts without apology or diminishment, from claiming your rightful place in the world, whatever your age or circumstances. As I pulled into my driveway at Riverside Gardens, I noticed Grace sitting on her porch, enjoying the mild spring evening. She waved me over, patting the seat beside her. "I've been thinking about what you said in your acceptance speech," she remarked as I joined her. "About dimming your light for someone else to shine. It resonated with so many women I know." "It was my truth," I said simply, though I'm discovering that speaking it aloud helps others recognize their own versions of the same pattern. Grace nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when you first moved in after your divorce, I thought you were embarking on a journey of independence. But it's become something much more profound, a journey of influence. Your choices are rippling outward, changing more lives than just your own." Her observation mirrored my earlier reflections so perfectly that I smiled. "Perhaps that's the gift of beginning again at our age, Grace. We have enough perspective to see beyond ourselves, enough wisdom to build not just for our present, but for other women's futures." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. After a lifetime of accommodating others' needs and visions, I had finally created a life that fully expressed my own values and capabilities, not in opposition to my past, but as an evolution of it, honoring both the supportive wife I had been and the visionary leader I had become. It wasn't about revenge or even vindication. It was about completing a circle, about becoming whole, about allowing all facets of myself to shine at full wattage after decades in the shadows. At 66, my story wasn't ending. It was finally, truly beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.